Welcome to the Battle of Homestead Foundation's third Monday Markers with Charlie program. We are going to talk about the 1892 Battle of Homestead, which our organization was founded basically to tell that tale and to conserve the history of resistance represented in that battle. And also because this program will be released on July the 6th, the anniversary of the battle. So this battle is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, event in American labor history. It marked a important turning point in labor relations, and in 1992 and the centennial, our founder, Russ Gibbons of the Battle of Homestead, and myself, we wrote 3 state historical markers, and we will, in this program, we will talk about the 2 other ones at a later date: the Bose Building, where the Union was headquartered, and the cemeteries where the 6 of the 7 workers were buried after being killed during the battle. The labor history sites of Pittsburgh, written by myself and with the collaboration of Howard Scott, and the print shop of the United Steelworkers is available, and information will be at the end of this program on how to obtain it. The Homestead Strike of 1892 has long been recognized as a basic watershed point of change, radical change in the relationship between workers and management in America. The critical thing, I think, is that it really solidified and made dominant, and certainly in terms of any industrial employment, made the absolute right of management to employment at will, the doctrine of employment at will, that a company, a manager could fire a worker for any reason or no reason, or good reason or whatever, but had total power over the employment situation of their workers. And this gave and gives enormous power, and makes it very difficult to organize unions in the United States. This absolute right of employment at will has been modified somewhat by gender and racial discrimination issues, but they're very hard to prove. The Homestead Strike, like today, happened during a period of immense and important and fundamental technological change, which workers were seeing their very work and livelihood be radically transformed. Iron was, for the Civil War, the enormous amounts of iron produced were done in small batch production by teams of workers, and the entire process in the North was highly unionized. And skilled workers had enormous power over the production process. With the introduction of the Bessemer and open hearth furnaces, the power of individual workers or teams of workers was greatly reduced, and the massive nature of the production process, and the fact that men were basically used as interchangeable parts, especially toward the bottom of the hierarchy, made it very relatively easy for management to control the workforce through the intimidation of employment at will. So the impact of technological change was very hard, difficult on the unions and the workers, and the power shifted radically to management. Workers, though, at Homestead were determined to get a voice on the job, especially when it dealt with safety and health. They wanted to continue the right to bargain collectively. They had won a contract in 1889 with Frick and the Carnegie Corporation, and they wanted to continue that contractual relationship, which gave them some real power on the shop floor. And third, they wanted the right of association, that you could belong to a labor union or to a political party and not see your employment threatened by that membership. And finally, the workers at Homestead asserted a certain ownership right to their job, as long as they were doing it well, effectively, that they maintained that it was unjust that power of the company could be used to deprive them of employment for themselves and their family without due process. So a certain level of ownership of a job which could not be just simply broken by management. So early on the morning of July 6th, the contract had ended on July 1st. Two barges loaded with 300 Pinkerton guards with Winchester repeating rifles came up to the landing site at Homestead. The town had been warned hours before by railroad workers, telegraphers, and watch people along the route, and there were thousands gathered. They had broken into Fort Frick, the wooden fence with barbed wire, electrified barbed wire that surrounded the mill, and they were at the landing site. The Pinkerton forces attempted to land. There were words back and forth, and then gunfire, and by 8 a.m., very serious gunfire started happening as people began to be killed and seriously injured. The battle lasted all day. It was a 10-hour affair, and by late afternoon, the Union, which previously, days before, had called in the sheriff of Allegheny County and told him that if Frick sent armed guards to Homestead to take away their jobs, there would be broad resistance and that the Union itself could not be responsible. However, by late afternoon, they became fearful that the Pinkertons, all of them, would be killed, and they decided to intervene. And Hugh O'Donnell, the president, accepted the Pinkerton surrender in the late afternoon, and the Pinkertons were marched through a gauntlet of women and children who stripped them, in some cases beat them, terrified them until they reached the German singing hall, where the Union held them until they shipped them out at midnight on a train. Very dramatic events that happened there. The women of Homestead were compared to Amazons or to the dark Dahomean female warriors who had fought the French that year before in West Africa. But initially, public opinion was very strongly in favor of the workers, but after the National Guard was sent into Homestead, and particularly after the assassination attempt by Alexander Berkman against Henry Clay Frick, public opinion shifted against the workers. The results were that Union loyalists were blacklisted, had enormous consequences on the shop floor, as many Union people were denied their jobs, and replacement scabs, black sheep, were brought in to take their places, and the mill was running by the fall full steam. And without the Union, which had generally imposed a 6-day, 10-hour roughly, because they did it according to the length of the open hearth heats, it went from a 60-hour week to an 84-hour week. The workforce, and with electrification of the mills, the workforce now was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, daylight and second shift. However, perhaps the most devastating impact of the strike, in my opinion, came with the imposition not only of the 84-hour week, but the swing shift, which demanded that workers put in 84 hours in 1 week, and then the next on daylight, and then the next week they would put in 84 hours on night turn. This affected the bottom half of the mill employees, and what it did was it effectively, very effectively, restricted workers' involvement in the local political process in the town borough. Before the strike, when the union was there, the borough council was overwhelmingly union. The mayor was Honest John McLuckie, an eloquent leader of the union forces. But after the triumph of the corporation, the workers were excluded from participation in the political process, and those then who were able to continue to be involved in politics were those who worked straight daylight, who had evenings available to attend council meetings and be a part of the civic and political life of the community. In this way, the white, black, and immigrant labor was effectively excluded from having a voice in the running of these towns. This only changed after the election victory, particularly in 1936, when the mill towns of the Monongahela, Allegheny, Ohio Valley overwhelmingly went for the New Deal and Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the union came in with the Steelworkers Organizing Committee under the leadership of Pittsburgh's Philip Murray, and established a industrial citizenship where people had the right to due process, where the hours were reduced they worked 3 shifts, 3 8s instead of 2 12s. And this was an enormous victory for working people to have that representation and to have that respect on the job. The Battle of Homestead, one of the great moments of American labor history, one which our organization, of course, is particularly concerned with and wants everyone to remember its importance. Thank you.